All right, I'll start with the intro. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 22 of the Snake in the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Vines. You can find me on Twitter at jsnake_DFF. In this episode, I have David Gautieri coming on the podcast. I may have said that wrong, David. You'll have to correct me in just a moment, but you should follow David on Twitter at Guru Fantasy World. He's a creator of at Guru FF World, does a waiver report for at Famous Fantasy and Flames, and is the co-host for the Fantasy Football Almanac podcast with Sean Ryan. And today we're going to have a knockout, drag-out fight about who is the Dynasty TE1, and it's going to be between, of course, Travis Kelce and George Kittle. So welcome, David. How are you doing?
Welcome, man. I love the intro. You make me feel like Mike Tyson over here. Knockout. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a pretty intense little battle we have. And for anybody listening, I am on side Travis Kelce. I think he should be the Dynasty TE1. David is on the side of George Kittle being the TE1, which I would say would be the fan favorite for most people.
I would say I'm definitely with the consensus here, which helps me because I didn't really have a dog in the fight, to be honest, when I agreed to do this debate. But I thought it would be fun taking George Kittle's side. So we'll see how it plays out and how I'm feeling when we come out of it.
I know. It'll be interesting. And then anybody that listens, feel free to at either of us on Twitter and say who won the debate. And with any debate, obviously, we're all just trying to guess. So this will be a lighthearted debate. We're not going to start yelling at each other and getting pissed off or anything. But before we get into our debate, one question I ask every guest is, what is one hobby that you really enjoy doing that does not relate to fantasy football?
For me, it's definitely cooking. It's cooking and eating. Probably eating more than cooking. But I've been a chef my whole life. That's what I do to earn a living. So it's what I do in my free time. It's not just a job for me. It's really a passion. I mean, who doesn't like to eat? So
yeah, I just made burgers a little while ago and I'm in my happy place. Is there anything new that you're making right now? Any new recipes that you're trying out?
Honestly, I've been back in the restaurant grind, so I've just been eating the restaurant food, unfortunately, a little bit too much, I would say.
What's your favorite thing at your restaurant or the restaurant you're at?
We have Philly cheesesteak spring rolls, which are to die for, with that zesty ketchup. Can't beat it.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I've always loved a good Philly cheesesteak, even though I have never been to the Northeast, but the Texas alternative, which I know a lot of people will say it's not up to par. And so it'll definitely be something I'll have to try eventually when we can all travel again with everything, once everything chills out a little bit.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to being able. I was looking forward to the Midwest Conference. I don't know if you were going to go to that. I was looking forward to that this year, put on by Bob Long. So hopefully next year we can maybe meet up there, and that would be good to see everyone in person.
Yeah, I agree. That'd be great. It's been super funky, just with everything trying to get used to the current normal, and hopefully, expecting for the best in maybe the spring, maybe the summer. Who knows?
Maybe the fall. Hopefully, be optimistic, right?
That's true. That's true. So today, as I've already mentioned, we're going to talk George Kittle versus Travis Kelce. And for everybody listening, we have 4 major points, and that is age and durability, and then production, supporting cast, which includes the quarterback and other receivers or running backs on the team, coaching staff, and then we'll do a summary, like final points. So with this, David and I are going to just flip-flop. We'll have little points that we can have little rebuttals if we want to just mention something that we disagree with. But I'm going to go ahead and start with age and durability, and then David will go next. So I'll go ahead and start with Travis Kelce. So I'm going to go ahead and begin by talking about the elephant in the room. Yes, Kelce is 30. And Kittle is 26. But age should not be the only factor when looking at tight ends. Also, Kelce is as durable as they come. Sure, he's had a couple of surgeries through his career, and one season in 2017 he had 2 concussions, but he has not missed a game in the last 6 seasons, while George Kittle has missed a game in 2017 and 2 games in 2019. Also, George Kittle had a shoulder dislocation in 2018, and some of y'all may be wondering why this is that important. It is important because of the shoulder dislocation rate, according to @FB Injury Doc, is 55% without surgery, and Kittle did not get surgery. Who's another player that has shoulder dislocation? His name is Dalvin Cook, and he has missed the fantasy football playoffs last year because he re-dislocated his shoulder. So to summarize what I have to say, age is not everything. Kelce is as durable as they come, and Kittle has a 55% chance of re-dislocating his shoulder. He dislocated back in 2018. So David, what do you have?
I love that we're starting with the elephants in the room, right? Just get them out of the way. And you talk about Kelce's elephant in the room. That's his age. Kittle's, it's the shoulder, right? Just a quick question for you before I really get into it. What you would say the shoulder injury probably is the one you're most concerned about, right?
Yeah, it's just because the unknown with it, and with anything, I know it's 55%, so people will say, "Oh, it's more likely than not." But Kittle could be healthy for the next couple of years, but it just adds a little bit of extra risk, in my opinion.
That's fair. And so, to me, when I look at the injuries, that's definitely a factor that's being weighed. But I think the age gap is just a little bit bigger. If we look at it this year, we have Kelce 31 years old, right? This is going to be Kittle's 27-year-old season. They're actually almost exactly 4 years apart. They're both born in October. So next year we'll have Kelce 32, Kittle 28. The year after, 33 versus 29, 34 versus 30 after that. And we're kind of I think the argument for Kelce's built on looking at those next 3-4 years. But as far as the injuries, I feel like it kind of gets a little bit overblown with George Kittle, because when you look at when he's missed games, he hasn't missed a game to that shoulder injury. He's missed 3 games in 3 years. The first year it was as a rookie. He missed 1 game to a sprained ankle, and then he missed 2 last year to a knee sprain. So again, the shoulder injury, it is worrisome. You have to take it into consideration, but you look at what happens with Travis Kelce gets hurt. Right? You talk about his injuries. He's not had a perfect injury career. His first year in the league, he played 1 play, and then he fractured his knee and was out for the entire season. So that it did happen. It happened, 6 years ago, but it did happen. And you talk about he also had a shoulder cleanup surgery in 2017. Nothing serious. He didn't miss any games from that, but he did have a minor surgery. He had a concussion in 2017 against the Texans, and then he also had another concussion in 2018 against the Titans, in which they were eliminated in the playoff game. So we don't know if he would have missed the next week because of that. And this kind of just ties back into the age for me, because if you look at what happens if either of these guys do get injured, right, going forward, if Kelce gets hurt this year, next year he's going to be a 32-year-old tight end coming off an injury. So not only is that going to severely damage his dynasty value if you're planning on trading him, but it's going to make you also start to second guess him a little bit if you're planning on keeping him as your starting tight end. You look at the flip side, George Kittle suffers a serious injury this year. Next year, he's a 28-year-old tight end who still has some time to really bounce back. He's got that age buffer that's kind of a cushion, I would say, as protection if he does end up missing a significant chunk of time. So when it comes down to me, I think the age and durability, it's about even between those two, where you look at it being an advantage for the age for Kittle and being an advantage for the durability for Kelce.
Yeah, and you brought up some great points, and I don't have anything to add. So I'm going to go ahead and have you just go straight into production. So we'll be, again, talking production, Kittle versus Kelce.
All right, awesome. So in terms of production, I want to look at the first 3 years of their career, right, just to kind of compare their timelines. So Kelce missed that first year. Like I said, he played 1 play that first season and hurt his knee. His second season, which was basically his first full season, he had 67 for 862, 5. The second season, he had 72 for 875 and 5 touchdowns. In his third year was his real true breakout with 85 receptions, 1,125 yards, and 4 touchdowns. You look at Kittle, on the other hand, as a rookie, he had 43 for 515 yards and 2 touchdowns. So his rookie year wasn't quite on Kelce's level. But then you look at that second year breakout. He broke the tight end record for receiving yards in his second year, 88 for 1,377, 5 touchdowns. And then you go back to last year as well, 85 receptions, 1,053 yards, 5 touchdowns. That was in 14 games. If he paced out over 16 games, that would have been 97 receptions, 1,203 yards, and 5 touchdowns. So the production is almost identical. If you look at it on a points per game basis, 2018, Kelce averaged 18.4 points per game, Kittle 16.2. So it was definitely a production gap. It was about 2 points per game, which is a selling point for Kelce. But if you look at the fantasy playoffs when it mattered, we had Kelce score 20.7 points in the first week of the fantasy playoffs, week 14, Kittle 13. So that's about a 7-point advantage. Kelce, that helped. You look at week 2, 13 points for Kelce, 38 points for George Kittle. He dropped the whopper. If you advanced past the first round, he probably carries you into that championship round. And then you talk about the third week, Kelce had 10.4, Kittle 8.1. So it was about the same the first 2 weeks, slight advantage to Kelce the first week. But that middle week, Kittle was the better option. Probably for the stretch, Kittle was the better option, even though he had 2 points less per game, which you could say it might have affected seeding or whatever. But even if it did affect the seeding, the difference between your opponents would have been 25 points that second week between a 38-point game from Kittle and Kelce. So it's a major gap that it would be. And then you look at last year, they each averaged 15.9 points per game exactly. So it was literally identical production. You look at the fantasy playoffs, Kelce, 19.6 in the first round, Kittle, 18.7 in the first round, so 1 point away, essentially the same thing. Kelce in the second round, 27.2, Kittle, 28.4, essentially the same exact thing. Third round, Kelce, 21.4, Kittle, 18.9. Again, essentially the exact same production.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a little different look at production, because going back to that age argument, a lot of people are going to say Kittle is not going to be able to, or sorry, not Kittle, Kelce is not going to be able to produce for the next 3 or 4 years because, like you mentioned, he is going to turn 31 in the season, same as George Kittle will turn 27. Because, yeah, I looked at it, and they're like 3 days apart or 4 days apart. It's crazy. Their birthdays are so close, just a couple years different. So we have seen older tight ends produce at an elite level in the NFL. A couple of names are Antonio Gates, Shannon Sharpe, and Tony Gonzalez. So Antonio Gates did not have as successful as a career with the high-end tight end finishes, but he still finished as the tight end 3 at 30 years old, and he was the tight end 3 again at 34. Shannon Sharpe was the tight end 2 at 32, the tight end 3 at 33, the tight end 4 at 34, and was the tight end 2 again at 35. And then Tony Gonzalez, who is the GOAT of fantasy football tight end production, produced as the tight end 2 and tight end 1 until the age of 37, which is absolutely nuts. And I'm not saying that Travis Kelce is going to pull a Tony Gonzalez and be able to score that many points until the age of 37, but Travis Kelce is the only tight end to score and be the tight end 1 for 4 consecutive years. So Travis Kelce is easily up in that echelon of players with those guys. And that makes me think for the next 3 or 4 years that Travis Kelce, and I know people are going to say, oh, you're extrapolating too much, this and that, but I really do think that Travis Kelce, with his supporting cast, which will be the next thing we talk about, can produce that elite level he's been producing for the next 3 or 4 years. And that's that dynasty window I look at. And I don't think we should immediately push Kelce to the tight end 2, or sometimes people are pushing him to the tight end 3 and putting Mark Andrews above him. And we've seen similarly talented tight ends produce until their mid-30s, and we have seen Kelce produce consistently for the last 4 years, like I've already mentioned. So with the production, he may be on the older side, but we've seen it happen before.
That's good. That's good. If I can, I just want to talk about those older tight ends because I took a look at them too a little bit. So the first one you mentioned, actually, I think it was the second one you mentioned, but first one I looked at, Tony Gonzalez, right? The GOAT tight end. I wanted to see basically what's the best case scenario for Travis Kelce if he finishes his career like Tony Gonzalez. And you looked at Tony Gonzalez, and he did continue to produce, and he played until he was 37 years old, but he only had over 900 yards once after the age of 33. You look at Antonio Gates. He played until he was 38. The last 2 seasons hardly count. His highest yardage total after the age of 34, 630 yards, right? Shannon Sharpe, he played very successfully up until 35, but he retired after 35. So we could see the same kind of thing happen with Kelce. And then I also looked at Jason Witten, who played until he was 37. He was under 700 yards and 70 receptions every year after 33. So it just kind of breaks down. No matter how you look at it, 33, 34 seems to be the age where no matter how good you are, even if you're Tony Gonzalez, like you're going to start going downhill. So that gives Kelce at best this year is 31-year season. Next year is 32-year-old season. The year after, and then the year after that. So that's 4 more seasons, and he'll be in his 34-year-old season. So he could do it, but that's about as much as you're going to get, I think, out of Kelce at best.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's more interesting with Travis Kelce is he has shown that he can get that elite yardage. And I know that him and George Kittle, which George Kittle did beat out Kelce in 2018 with more yards, but he's been up there in the yard count. And I do agree that that production will eventually level off, but I think that he can maintain that production for the next 3 years and be more productive tight end than George Kittle. That's just my belief. So we'll go ahead and go to the supporting cast. Unless, do you have anything else to add, David?
No, I think we hit all the points on those couple ones.
Okay, so the supporting cast, and this is where I think just Kelce's supporting cast overall is just so much better than Kittle all around, which is a positive and can also be a negative and is a negative. So for Kelce, he has the best QB in the NFL throwing in the ball, and that's just a huge bonus. You have Patrick Mahomes for the next forever. His whole career, he's going to have Patrick Mahomes being his quarterback. Also, I know some people will point out that Kelce has Hill and Clyde Edwards-Helaire on his team, but Kelce has produced as a tight end 1, even while Hill produces wide receiver 1. And I know people will mention that was Mahomes' MVP season, but we've still seen it that whenever the wide receiver produces at a high level, the tight end also produces at a high level, and Travis Kelce had more receptions than Hill in that year. Mahomes can feed everyone on the team. One very, very slight concern for Kittle for me is that we have not seen Kittle produce with better wide receiver talent around him. So this current year, Debo would be going into his year 2, and Ayuk is in his year 1, and they're the top wide receiver talent Kittle has played with in his career. And I know both Debo and Ayuk are injured for 2020. So Kittle may eat early and often, but for 2021 and beyond, I would like to see Kittle produce with that new talent around him like Kelce has.
That's fair. You bring up a lot of great points. And I think that's the major selling point right there is you hit the nail on the head. It's all you got to say two words, Patrick Mahomes, Mahomies. Everybody wants anything doing with Mahomies, right? I mean, and you can't blame him. The guy's amazing. But you look at it, George Kittle, we go back to his production. 43, 515, 2 as a rookie. He did that with C.J. Beathard, Brian Hoyer, and 6 games of Jimmy G. Year 2, 88, 13, 77, 5. He did that with C.J. Beathard and Nick Mullins and a couple games of Jimmy G. Like, it's great that Kittle has this amazing quarterback consistent. George Kittle doesn't need it. He just frankly doesn't need it. He can do it without it. And then you talk about, okay, he's tethered to Mahomes. Who is George Kittle tethered to? He's tethered to Kyle Shanahan, which is kind of getting into the next bullet a little bit. But I think if you look at it, the supporting cast, the situation, it's essentially just as stable in San Fran as it is in Kansas City. I don't see Kyle Shanahan going anywhere anytime soon. Jimmy Garoppolo has just been inserted into the situation. He looks to be firmly their quarterback for the future. So I can see George Kittle having Jimmy Garoppolo as his quarterback in Kyle Shanahan's system for his entire career, just like I can see Travis Kelce being tethered to Patrick Mahomes.
Do you have any concerns with the argument of George Kittle not producing with that top-end wide receiver talent around him?
That's a good question because I actually had a few bullets point there, and I did forget to say them. I actually don't, because the main argument, right, it's for Travis Kelce, it's that you're only looking at the next 2, 3, maybe 4 years. And then if you want to flip it for George Kittle, you can't just say, oh, what happens if down the road 3, 4 or 5 years from now they bring in another wide receiver? They just invested in Deebo Samuel. They just spent a first round pick on Brandon Ayuk. They're not going to keep drafting wide receivers in the first round every year. At a certain point, maybe, yes, they do bring in a third wide receiver. Do we know if it's going to be an alpha to make Deebo and Ayuk complementary? Or maybe they choose to bring in a third complementary guy and let Deebo and Ayuk be those kind of wide receivers that they lean on. So I don't think it's fair to Kittle to project down the road in years if possibly they add another stud wideout, if we're really trying to focus on the now and what's happening today.
Sweet. I have nothing to add, so I'll go ahead and have you start, David, with the coaching staff.
So I already mentioned him. Kyle Shanahan, everybody knows, right? Everybody knows at this point. He's one of the brightest coaching minds in the NFL. He has no problem scheming plays for his best players. And I just want to throw out a few stats that really just back it up. He's been, as a play caller, top 5 in yardage with every team he's been a play caller for, minus Cleveland Browns for one season, which you can't really count against him. He had Andrew Hawkins, Taylor Gabriel, and a 30-year-old Miles Austin as his top receivers that year. He actually, I think, did a pretty good job that year. But you look at the teams he did hit top 5 in yardage with. Houston, he did it twice in 2008 and 2009. They were 3rd and 4th in offensive yardage. With the Redskins in 2000, or I should say Washington football team, I apologize. What was at the time the Redskins in 2012, they were the 5th overall offense in yardage. Atlanta, everybody knows 2016, what the magic was, 28-3. They were 2nd in yardage that year. And then you talk about last year, San Francisco, they were 4th in yardage last year. And then on top of just the yardage, if you want to look at scoring, he's had multiple top 5 scoring offenses. That Washington team in 2012, Atlanta in 2016, though they were 4th and 1st in points scored. And then you look at last year with San Fran, they were 2nd in points scored in addition to being 4th in yardage. And honestly, I think they could improve as an offense. So I think the coaching staff, the system, again, I think it all aligns to just keep the George Kittle train chugging.
All right. So I'm going to focus on a little bit of a different point with the coaching staff, and that is the running versus passing splits. So I do agree Kyle Shanahan is a fantastic coach. Andy Reid is also a fantastic coach. So in 2019, the Chiefs threw the ball 576 times, which was at 60% of the time. For the 49ers, they threw the ball 478 times, which was 47% of their plays. So the Chiefs had about 100 more passing attempts than the 49ers, which that also goes back to Travis Kelce has the better supporting cast around him. So they do need that more production, more attempts going around for everybody to eat, which I think that we've seen it happen where Mahomes, once he gets started, everybody just starts eating. So also, Andy Reid is known for his scheming through the passing game. While Kyle Shanahan, he is known for his scheming in general, but it's really related to running the ball. That's why everybody was goo-goo gaga over Raheem Mostert and the Tevin Coleman debate and all of that. And the main plus for Kelce is even with him having a better wide receiver and running back around him, there's still plenty of volume to lead him to be a tight end 1.
That's great. I don't have any disagreements with you there.
All right, we'll go ahead and go to the final point. So this will just be a summary of what we've said. So I'll go ahead and start it. So as I mentioned before, for me, age is not a factor when comparing Kelce versus Kittle. And Kelce is slightly more durable than Kittle. I know David brought up some great points related to the age sort of drop off. So I'd say that's more of a wash. Kelce has already proved that he can compete at an elite level of production. And we have seen tight ends produce an elite level into their mid-30s. Also, Kelce has the best QB in the NFL and has already produced with this current supporting cast. While I don't think Kittle has produced there yet, but we may not see it in 2020. So this may be a wash argument because Debo's hurt and Ayuk is hurt. Also, I will say the coaching staffs are pretty similar. I do think Andy Reid is better at scheming for passes, and Andy Reid's offense in 2019 passed 100 more times than Kyle Shanahan. Lastly, and this is something you saw on Twitter, David, I did a poll on Twitter asking if people thought Kelce would be in the elite tier of all-time fantasy football tight ends like Tony Gonzalez, Shannon Sharp, and Antonio Gates, and 75% of people said yes. So Kelce has the talent to keep producing, so I want him as my dynasty tight end 1.
I love it. I love it. Honestly, I think it was a great debate today, and I think if there's anything to take away from this, to be frank, it's not Kelce versus Kittle. It's either. Get either of these guys if you can in a dynasty format. They're both in a great position to just keep producing for at least 3 to 4 years, which again is the dynasty window that most people will reference. Both of these guys, Jake hit the nail on the head for Kelce. If you want to flip it around and look at Kittle, the framing, it comes down to the fact that he's a whole 4 years younger than Kelce. At best, Kelce's got 4 more really good tight end 1 years based on the look at Tony Gonzalez, Jason Witten, and other historical tight ends who have played into their late 30s. So you look at that, that's basically twice as long for Kittle as Kelce in a dynasty format that you're going to get production from. In the production, it's almost identical. It's basically the same. The injuries are a concern for George Kittle, but again, the main injury people are concerned about, that shoulder, hasn't cost him a game yet. He's missed 3 games in 3 years. He's a trooper. He fights through it. He's going to continue to battle. He's got a system with a coach who just has had historical success offensively in every place he's gone to. And then the wide receivers are essentially locked in for at least the next 2 to 3 years. It's possible they bring in another stud. But pretty much we're looking at George Kittle being the heart and soul of the San Francisco passing game for the next at least 2 to 3 years.
Awesome, David. And that's a great point. That I know we're debating sort of the minutia of Travis Kelce versus George Kittle. And some people may listen to this and be like, why are we debating this? But I think it's good to also sort of dig deep into these players and think, why do we like them? And I think you did a fantastic job of talking about George Kittle and why he should be the Dynasty tight end one. And I feel like I did a pretty good job with Travis Kelce. I think some listeners are going to side with you. I think you're very, very persuasive. And to be honest, also, Travis Kelce and George Kittle are back-to-back in my rankings, my Superflex Dynasty rankings. They're literally, I have Travis Kelce one spot above George Kittle. And
yeah, while we're talking about that real quick, I'm in a Dynasty startup with Fantasy Stoner right now, who a lot of you guys might know on Twitter. And it's a 1 PPR 0.75 tight end premium. He started with Kittle. I believe it was 10 overall, and he took Kelce on the turn. He started Kittle, Kelce in a Dynasty startup. Tight end premium.
Love that.
Yep.
And one last point I will make also is that with me saying that I have Kelce as my Dynasty tight end one, that doesn't mean that in a Dynasty startup I'm going to draft Kelce in front of Kittle, because you do have to play some ADP and all of that. And with anybody listening, feel free to reach out to David and I about who you think won the debate. I think that I may put up a poll after this airs for a little while.
If you can hit anywhere near 50%, that's amazing, because I came in on the high ground here. Absolutely had the consensus on my side.
I'll take any little not victory lap. I'll take
if you can get 30%, I'll be impressed. I'll be impressed with 30%.
I'm probably just going to get roasted. That's all going to happen. So, David, do you have any projects that you're currently working on, or anything you want to tell the listeners about?
Projects, man, I'm trying to just keep pumping out content as much as I can. I'm working on the all fade list. I know people are going to draft this weekend. I'm trying to get it up Saturday. I tried finishing it off today. Didn't quite have enough time. Working all day tomorrow. But I'm going to try and get that all fade list up for you guys on Saturday. And then after that, big long-term goals, I'm trying to get the website transformed, because honestly, I'm terrible at website creation, and I'm good at writing. I can write. Sometimes I can't stop writing, unfortunately, to my detriment, but I can't seem to build a website for crap. So that's my big goal. That's my big project right now, is kind of chip away at that and try to build it into something legitimate.
Awesome. Everybody should definitely follow David at Guru Fantasy World, and that's World without the O. Both he and I are on the Logan Thomas hype train.
Choo-choo!
Yeah, right. David had a fantastic Logan Thomas thread that was way more in depth than I did. So definitely excited about Logan Thomas. I know we both are getting pinned on Twitter, or added on Twitter all the time. I'm
getting tagged in every Logan Thomas post left and right, and I love every single second of it.
I know, and I think some people are forgetting that the reason he was so awesome is he was free on the waiver wire. So a lot of people are sort of getting a little bit too crazy with it and thinking, oh, it'll be a top tight end one. And I'm like, all right, so if anybody comes at me after this season being like, you told me to get Logan Thomas, I'll be like, dude, it was not to be this major like Darren Waller season. It's that streaming potential for me, because I play some start 2 tight end leagues. I play some deep tight end premium leagues, and Logan Thomas is the type of guy I want on my bench versus having like a who's a good example? Like a Lamar Miller. I'd rather have a Logan Thomas upside guy than Lamar Miller.
Especially at the tight end position, man. It can be such a fickle beast trying to find production there.
Yep, I agree. So again, remind everybody, go follow David on Twitter at Guru Fantasy World without the O. Also make sure to subscribe, rate, and review to the Snake in the Draft podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and let's be snakes this draft season.